Recently, Google has been locked in a legal battle with the United States over whether or not it's a monopoly. I've been watching some clips of Google's CEO, Sundar Pichai, to feel the air around this trial. That led me to this David Rubenstein clip.
I mean, with our scale and size, I think scrutiny is inevitable, and we've always engaged very respectfully and responsibly through these processes.
But then I looked in the comments and found one that asked, "They built it, no one's forced to use it. How is that a monopoly?" So today, I'm going to answer that question, explain what Google is doing, and how this case against Google could usher in a new age of the internet that's better for everyone. I'm TWL, a Canadian journalist. This is the first episode of A Guide with Glasses, a podcast produced for the Diverse Gazette. Okay, so let's start from the top. Back in August of 2024, Google lost its first antitrust case against the U.S. Department of Justice, which claimed Google had an illegal monopoly on its search engine, Chrome.
And I just bought Park Lane.
Antitrust is a set of laws put into place to stop one company from getting too big and taking over an entire market. Meta, formerly Facebook, is currently being taken to trial over accusations that it consolidated the social media market. In a leaked email, current CEO Mark Zuckerberg even laments that Facebook may be forced to split Instagram and WhatsApp into their own companies. Both are currently owned by Meta. Now, back to Google. The judge in the search engine case found Google to be a monopoly. The court found that yes, Google was the best search engine, but it was using its size to block out the competition. Not only that, Google was also paying companies like Apple to make it the default browser, which smaller search engine companies could never have afforded due to Google's size. And finally, Chromium, which allows companies to build their search engines on top of Chrome's technology, which only adds to Chrome's power in the search industry.
Jeez, what a mouthful.
To give an example, NPR said the judge presiding over the case wrote Google, quote, enjoys a 89% share of the market of general search services, which increases to 94% on mobile devices, end quote. To give you a reference of how big Google is, Visual Capitalist combined reporting from the Wall Street Journal and Beverage Digest, which reports on the global drink industry. In 2023, Coca-Cola, Diet Coke, Sprite, Dr. Pepper, and Pepsi own just over 50% of the soda industry in the United States. Google owns a third more of global search results than the 5 biggest sodas make up of the U.S. beverage industry combined.
Listen, Bob, you said a lot of numbers. I'm going to need you to tone it down.
The second case against Google is around their ad business. I'm going to talk less about this one, mostly so you know what's going on and to add to my case about search through Google's monopoly on advertising. To make a long story short, the Department of Justice alleged Google's ad business comes down to the company owning the tech that posts online ads and the software that connects advertisers and publishers to create a Google ecosystem that, once you get into, is hard to get out of. The DOJ also alleges that Google's ad servers held 87% of all US online advertising and 91% of the global market share, as per reporting from the Morning Brew. What both of these rulings mean is that Alphabet, Google's parent company, could lose major parts of its business. So what does this mean for the internet? Well, let's do some history. We're going to look at 3 antitrust cases and explain how each of them is affecting what's happening today with Google. First, AT&T. In the 1970s, AT&T was the biggest company in the world. They researched, developed, and manufactured telephone equipment, provided long-distance calls, and owned 24 local operating companies across the US. The company was so big that it was raising prices to subsidize its less profitable sides of the business, which effectively kept it as the United States' biggest service provider.
Here is one of the phone company's most advanced electronic switching centers for long-distance calling. A big improvement.
That's a
from the
Bell
old days.
System commercial from 1977. Now, AT&T's legal trouble started in 1949, but that's a very long story, so here's what you need to know. From roughly 1949 to 1968, legal cases were attempted against AT&T with differing success. One of the major lawsuits that was won against the company was Microwave Communications, which was awarded $1.8 billion but received a reduced amount. Now, it's in 1974 where the real case starts, and it's all thanks to Watergate.
On this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
Thanks, Nixon. The Watergate scandal had cut confidence in the Justice Department, so in an effort to get it back, Attorney General William Saxby launched the government's antitrust case against AT&T. This would be the last successful antitrust case the United States had ever won. But we'll come back to AT&T later. The next two important antitrust cases are IBM in 1982 and Microsoft in 2001. Both of these need less explanation, but both explain the different ways in which antitrust is meant to work. IBM was at the head of the development of computer software and hardware before its antitrust case started in 1975. Now, they won their antitrust case thanks to the Ronald Reagan administration with our old friend William Baxter. Wait, what?
Wait, William Saxby and William Baxter are two different people? Hang on a second.
Sorry, I meant Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust William Baxter, calling the government's case very weak in an article from the Washington Post. But to avoid being broken up, in 1969, IBM sold off most of its software business, and even slowed down its hardware developments, which were already the heart and soul of the company. Years after the case was closed, the slowdown still affected the company, allowing another player to swoop up market share. Man, I love that sound. Microsoft's antitrust trial was around two things. The company connected Internet Explorer to its operating system, meaning that other internet browsers had a harder time unseating the pre-installed browser, and their alleged anti-competitive activity, which allowed them to crush competition. Microsoft was so big at the time that something funny happened years later when the US government sued Apple. The Associated Press writes, claiming it was a monopoly, quote, "The Justice Department pointed back to complaints that company co-founder Steve Jobs had raised in 1998 against Microsoft's dirty tactics while urging regulators to take steps to force the PC software maker to play fair." End quote.
Oh, a stylus, right? We're going to use a stylus. No. No. Who wants a stylus?
It was this antitrust case that allowed Apple, and more importantly Google, to leapfrog Microsoft and become some of the biggest players in the world. And the crazy part is, Microsoft still recovered, along with IBM, and are both major industry players in computers today.
Get to the point!
Even when unsuccessful, antitrust can help bring competitiveness back to the market, and is always good for consumers. So, what about AT&T? Well, they also rebounded, but there's a different story there.
Hello? Honey, it's the Justice Department. We have to get a divorce.
AT&T was ordered by the court to break up into 7 different companies, and was also forced to divest from 22 of those 24 local operators I talked about before. In 2007, the Justice Department compiled a report on whether divestment from AT&T did anything to the market. Firstly, divestment overall seemed to have worked. The price to make calls between states went down every year between 1984 to 2004. But the DOJ study shows that long-range calls also fell in Canada and the EU without divestment, and the study later says the DOJ should have gone after the FTC rather than AT&T. Wait, what?
You've been served.
Now, to be fair, the author Robert W. Crandall has been writing about telecom companies for years, and has a PhD and is regularly working and advocating for better solutions in our society. I would, however, like to point out this study was published during the Bush administration. The New York Times said it best, quote, "President George W. Bush's government increasingly is handling U.S. antitrust cases with the most relaxed and least aggressive approach since the final years of the Reagan presidency." End quote. Reminder, Reagan's government was the reason IBM won their antitrust case. Do you know which other case ended around the same time as IBM? Yep, AT&T.
What a twist!
Now remember, AT&T still had to divest from its local operators and split into 7 companies. But Crandall's point is that the FTC didn't ensure regulation that could have protected consumers and lowered prices. And quickly, talking about Canada and the EU. The European Union has such low prices because there are so many companies competing that it would have put them at a disadvantage to raise prices. Therefore, there is no need for antitrust and divestment. While in Canada, we have 3 major players, Rogers, Bell, and TELUS, which, in of themselves, own 8 major service providers within their services, causing Canadians to have the second highest phone bills in the G7, a group of 7 countries considered some of the world's strongest. And I do have to say, there is no clear connection that says Crandall is blaming Reagan's Federal Trade Commission, and instead is probably blaming the Nixon administration. I'm only displaying what I see as clear evidence that the US has the highest service prices in the G7, and that it may have been even worse if the DOJ had sued the FTC instead of AT&T.
And now back to your regularly scheduled program.
The point of me telling you this is that we haven't seen something like this trial in over 25 years, and it's been a lifetime since a US citizen saw a win and change from antitrust. Gmail has always been a good service, with Google breaking ground with its 2 GB transfer. Chrome got big for a reason, and YouTube was made into such a good service that Netflix considers it its major opponent in the streaming wars. So, wouldn't it be nice if we could go back to a time when Google felt the need to push boundaries and try hard to make sure you wanted their products, not because everyone used them, but because they were good?
But wait, there's more!
Google right now is at the beginning of its legal battle with the Department of Justice over whether or not it's going to lose Chrome. If it does, Google will have to look towards what it wants its business to become, and the new company with just Chrome will look towards keeping its dominance in the search industry, which may improve the Chrome search engine in ways we didn't know it could. I'm going to keep an eye on this case, as it's very important to the future of the internet. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Next week, Canada will have a new Prime Minister. I'll go over their platform, the changes they face, and anything that interesting that happens on election night. You can also check the link in the description for our newsletter. This week, we're talking about the war in Ukraine and the Oscars. This has been a Guide with Glasses, produced entirely by me, TWL, for the Diverse Gazette. So I'll see ya when I see ya. Goodbye!